Welcome back to the Renaissance Space podcast, where we have the opportunity to listen and better understand life in education right now. I'm Georgina Cook, former English and literacy leader and now education specialist for all things language and literacy at Renaissance. For the last 25 years, I've been working to get kids loving literature, enjoying the freedom it brings and losing themselves in language. I thought I'd heard all the statistics surrounding the decline in reading enjoyment, but I was shocked to hear the Education Committee talk about a study into the confidence of promoting text across trainee teachers. They claim 31% of trainee teachers who read in their own time couldn't name a single children's author. And Professor Teresa Kremin told MPs that reading for pleasure is too often seen as a nice-to-have extra in schools, rather than core to developing lifelong readers. But it doesn't have to be this way. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking with Kate Sayer, Education Specialist from World Book Day, about how we engage teachers, children and their families to read for pleasure. Kate, welcome. Can you start by telling us about you, your background, your work with World Book Day? And I know you're doing a PhD about reading for pleasure with parents. So do you want to start by just introducing yourself?
So my career started as training as a primary school teacher, which I loved. And I loved doing the literacy work with children in particular, and kind of interactive literacy work that inspired and motivated them. And from there, I've worked in the third sector mostly with a focus on literacy. So looking at reading and writing interventions, particularly to support children who find reading and writing a challenge or that it's something that's not for them, and often using arts-based practice. So I've worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company and at the Story Museum and Discover Children's Story Centres too. And then from all of that, working with children and their families, I've ended up at World Book Day. And the brilliant thing about that is we've had loads of amazing conversations with teachers, with children, with librarians, with booksellers across the whole ecology. And what that's led to is kind of a real understanding of how complicated the reading journey is, and also kind of trying to identify access points into that. And that's what's led to my PhD, which is in parents reading for pleasure with their children.
Oh gosh, Kate, so that's so lovely to hear that. I know when we met before, I bet there's lots of teachers listening in thinking, wow, what a lovely career. Sometimes when we're in the classroom, we're with our children and making such a difference, but actually there's a whole world around schools that are there to support schools in the work that they do. And I certainly know I felt that since leaving the classroom. Sometimes I feel like that impact is much further reaching than we think. So lovely for you to share that. Thank you. The other thing that we talked about when we last met was what you're doing at World Book Day at the moment. And I know World Book Day have these 6 principles that they talk about for reading for pleasure. So I wondered whether we could start there. If you could just talk us through what those principles are and why they really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to do that. And yes, you're absolutely right about the difference from being in the classroom. And I think the privilege is you get to deep dive into things that you just don't have the time to do when you're in front of those children every single day. So yes, I acknowledge it's a privilege. So in terms of those principles, then we spent some time thinking about how we could make this massive moment mean something even more than it does to children and to the adults that surround them each day. And we started off by looking through the research literature around what encourages children to read for pleasure. And there's loads of it. And so what we hoped to do with creating these 6 principles was to synthesize that literature into something that's a little bit more easy to manage, if you like. So we've created these 6 principles, which hopefully are neither controversial nor surprising, but just put front of mind the types of things that we might want to try and do when we're working with children to develop a reading for pleasure habit specifically. So those are sharing books. So the act of adults sharing books with children sharing books with each other, even listening to audiobooks falls into that. Having access to books in the first place, obviously you can't, or reading material. So kind of it doesn't just have to be printed text. That is again, audiobooks and books in different formats. So graphic novels, so that wide range of kind of reading diet that we might want our children to have. But having access to that is obviously essential. Choice is something that is kind of massive and also a little bit complicated. So I'll spend a little more time talking about choice. So obviously, if children are going to read for pleasure, then they need to be motivated to do that. It's something they're doing at home. It's something that they're doing in their spare time. They're choosing to do it above another activity. So in terms of that, you need some reading material that's really going to motivate you to do that. So having access to material is important, but having a choice of what it is that you're reading is essential. And actually, it's one of the barriers that children talk about the most when they talk about struggling to read for fun or for read for pleasure. And that's for sort of two main reasons. One is not be able to see anything that suits them. And the other thing is for those early readers who haven't yet found something that they like reading. Every book is a possible opportunity to find something they don't like. Whereas for children who are readers already and have that habit and know the thing, start to have a sense of taste in what they like, they know there are spaces to go in those book corners and in the library. And even that might have a collection at home of things that they know that they enjoy, and that's safe for them. So a wider choice feels safer. So for those children who are just developing the habit or finding it hard, a smaller curated choice that is focused on the types of things they might enjoy outside of school or the type of humor that they like, so that adult knowing that child and how they feel, that's important, like curating a smaller choice for those children, whereas a wide ranging choice might be more appropriate for children who are kind of beginning to spread their wings a little bit in terms of their reading. So that's choice. Time, obviously, if we only develop a habit when we give a little bit of time to that regularly. We've seen that across all sorts of campaigns. And that idea of building a regular habit might be something that we need to do kind of more formally to begin with before it becomes an ingrained and an intrinsic habit for children. So carving out that time. And that can be at home and at school. Having help to choose what you want. So we just talked a little bit about that choice piece, but having an adult or a peer, and that who that is depends on how old the child is. So younger children respond better to adult support, and older children in general respond better to peer support. And that help isn't just in terms of finding the next most difficult book or the next thing that's going to challenge them, but really tuning into what children are interested in, and then passing a book back that might meet that need, if you like. So those relationships are really key. And actually, in terms of building those relationships, then children can start recommending books to adults as well. It doesn't have to be a one-way traffic from that point of view. And though if you have a relationship where there's book recommending going on, then that is a really motivational thing for children and people, and the people that teach them, actually. And then the final thing is fun. So we talk about ourselves as the Reading for Fun charity. There's a very important distinction between reading for fun and reading is fun here. So reading for fun is marking out the space that is a not in school, but a non kind of educational space for where reading can live for children. So it's not instructional necessarily. It's much more about finding that more relaxed, more personal, more individualized approach to reading. It can look as extreme as World Book Day, and it can be as little as having a comfy space in school with a biscuit and somebody just asking you if you like the book rather than asking you anything else about it. So that's for reading for fun, finding that showing children, and very much a showing, not telling, because children children who find it that they don't enjoy reading have told us that being surrounded by I love reading posters actually makes them feel more excluded from that reading culture in school, even though it's all done with extraordinarily great intentions. And we all have that hope for our children, don't we, that they will just pick this up instinctively because we know the wide-ranging benefits it brings.
There's so much there to unravel and so much that resonated, because it's so difficult, I think, for teachers sometimes to really balance that pressure to get children to read to learn, and all that surrounds that and everything that we try to squeeze in because our curriculum is so packed and our time with children is so short, whilst also having this huge pressure too to actually say, okay, well, we need kids to really love this. We need them to have volition. We need them to choose books. We want them to be doing it by themselves, and we want them to be independent. And that's a really difficult balance. As a teacher and as a parent, actually, I found that really quite challenging at different points in having my own children and also teaching. Let's just hone in on one of those things, because you mentioned choice being really huge for children, but also that they need the right support. So someone that knows them really well and knows books quite well, because it's very difficult to recommend and have those conversations and take that time that you talked about to build those knowledgeable relationships with children if you don't know them really well, but you also don't know books really well. And one of the things that I mentioned in the introduction to this podcast is the education committee that I listened to the panel this month. And One of the things that really struck me in that is they talked about trainee teachers and that only 31% of trainee teachers who actually said they read regularly couldn't name a single children's author. And that really resonated with me because teacher knowledge matters so much. And actually, we often spend our time talking about the children and what they like and what they know and what they do. But actually, there's a lot of support that we need to give to our adults because we don't read children's fiction. We might not read at all as a teacher, but you certainly might not read children's fiction as a teacher. So teacher modeling and relationships really important, isn't it? So I wonder whether you can talk a little bit about why teacher knowledge of children's books matters so much and how those relationships sit at the heart of reading for pleasure.
Yeah, great, Georgina. You pulled out a few really interesting things there, I think, in terms of teacher time and then also this kind of huge, there's a huge array of children's literature available. I mean, you can't just say, right, here's an easy list of the things that might inspire your children, because if you think about that each class that you've taught, they'll each have different preferences in terms of the reading that they might enjoy. And when we've talked about this with practitioners as well, there's it can be another layer of pressure for that teacher who is a wider ranging reader to be the single source of book recommendation for the entire school, which is an extraordinary additional responsibility on top of everything else that they're doing. So in terms of the things that you might go to address that, when we've spoken to practitioners as part of a project with the with Teresa Kremen's team at the Open University, they've pulled out things like what about if some of our staff time isn't directed training, but is instead just book exposure? That we go to talk to a bookshop or a librarian, and then we ask them for help to support the needs that exist in our classroom. So it doesn't have to be kind of training and lists and things. It can be those conversations with this. There is a support network that's broader than what you have in school, number one. Also, don't think that it's only the reading lead that has got access to a repertoire of books and reading. And I would suggest that that wider school community and the practitioners that engage with that wider school community and their reading recommendations really benefit from that. So that can be everyone across the school staff. So various people have talked about the power of the reception team having a book preference and being able to recommend things and having that culture in school where it's everybody's job to do that. But also your parent community. There will be parents in your school who do have a wide repertoire around a particular genre because their kids particularly into it, who can support with that kind of thing. So it doesn't have to all exist within a single teacher's brain, which would be impossible. So one of the fantastic things about a reading culture is that it can be social, and that's one of another motivating factor where people are talking to each other about the things that they enjoy and find those little communities of people that like the same thing. And that can be a little bit tricky with reading. Children have said to us that when they go into other things that they're interested in, for example, into a gaming room or to football club, they know that all the children in that space like exactly what they like. Whereas when you say, I like reading, it can mean so many different things and it means something different to everybody. That's one of the complicated things about talking about reading in general. That finding those smaller communities of people who like the same stuff that you do can be a bit tricky. So opening up those conversations so you can discover those within school and recognizing that might not exist within a single classroom or within a single teacher's brain or within even just within the teaching staff can be quite liberating, I think, for school communities. And that's what practitioners have told us.
Yeah, there's so many ideas, isn't there? And I've seen so many brilliant bits of practice in schools where they've really focused on actually getting children to talk to their peers about what they like and using those networks as well. Like you say, it's not always just about one adult in the school having that knowledge and being up to date with all of that knowledge and trying to share that.
Can I just add something else there, which is I think the other thing that's really easy to do as a teacher is to walk into a room thinking you have to hold everything yourself. And I think sort of being that role model, meaning that you have to be showing that you're enjoying reading all the time. Actually, children respond really well to genuine role models, people who say to them, oh, do you know what? I found this one a bit tricky. And this is I think this is why, or I didn't like getting to the end of this book and now I don't know what to read next, and all of that kind of thing. And also being sort of acknowledging, not that you don't like reading necessarily, but that you might have found it hard to find things that you really do enjoy, but then those entry points for you might be different. So if you think about the gap between that reading expert teacher who seems to have every bit of knowledge around books and reading and might seem like they're reading the entire time, as a role model for a child who currently doesn't enjoy reading at all, there's a huge gap between that teacher and that child. So how can we in schools do a supportively for the staff as well as for the children, create a situation where children are exposed to a range of different types of reading role model that are all genuine, that so children can find those access points kind of and make those relationships with people who feel like them, and that can be quite empowering, although it's obviously makes you feel a little bit vulnerable at the same time.
I think that's absolutely, and I've definitely experienced that because there's two things there. One, obviously showing your vulnerabilities as a teacher. We don't know everything all of the time, and we're not going to enjoy everything all of the time, and that's absolutely fine. And children will be the same. So I think just those open, honest dialogues are really important. But I also have seen even within a school or in a parent group where one person seems to know it all and everybody else automatically feels like they're not good enough or they're not as good. And we get that with our children as well as our adults. So it's just really important to be able to have those open spaces. One of the things I remember as a teacher doing, we did a Carnegie reading group and we tried to have a range of children within those groups. And I remember one of the struggling readers saying, I just don't get it because they just seem to be able to do it. And I just don't understand this. And I taught A level and GCSE literature, and you'd be doing lots of really quite deep inference skills. And I think sometimes actually just as having that dialogue and talking about how we approach things that we find tricky can be a real eye opener for struggling adult readers and children readers too. Can make a big difference.
Yes, for sure. And it's also absolutely true that children recognize when someone isn't being genuine with them, and that can be read as hypocrisy or as actually not caring or devaluing in some ways as well. So that genuine relationship is really important.
Yeah, I mean, to me as a reader, you're on that path of discovery. You're always trying things. I sometimes pick books up, start it, hate it, and stop. So I think it's really important for if you want children to see themselves as readers, we need to know that actually we're all vulnerable and we're all learning when we're reading, and the range of text that we might be reading as well. It's not always this kind of postcard picture of you sitting in a reading corner with a lovely fiction book and having a wonderful time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's just go back to something else that you talked about then, because we've talked about that tension between teaching the skill of reading and then fostering the pleasure of reading. And we know that that's something really important. So positioning of reading as pleasure and not work is an important thing. So I wonder whether you can go back to this idea of how we position reading and what you mean by that and how regular reading might fit into building that habit of reading.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are different things at play here, and the children that we've spoken to have given us great insight into what this might look like for them. When we talk about reading, we've touched on this a minute ago with the conversation we just had around the types of reading, or talking about whether it's okay to say that you're finding something difficult. Often we give children the impression that it has to be fun, but it also has to be difficult and stretching and challenging and moving on to the next thing, so that there's a right set of things to read. And whether we say that explicitly or whether we do it implicitly through some of the behaviors that we model in school and at home, actually that exists with parents as much as it does with teachers in school, can give children the impression that what they're reading isn't good enough, and so what's the point potentially. So there's something around kind of meeting children where they currently are, that is really important there. So what do you enjoy? What types of things do you enjoy? And acknowledging the things that they like, even if it might make us feel like we're not going to be able to support them to make the progress we need them to make. And that pressure is so real, isn't it? We're trying so hard to make the best for these children that are in front of us. And we only have that, as you said before, that short amount of time with them. But at the same time, if we take a child reading a popular series and we are perhaps frustrated that that isn't stretching them enough, we probably don't want to say, how about you read instead? And then offer them a piece of classic literature. We might want to identify the features of that text that they enjoy. It might be stylistic, it might be content, it might be humor, and then try and find a next step that feels a little bit kind of more aligned to what they're currently enjoying. So we're not dismissing their choice. We're saying, oh, that's great. I wonder if you might also like this, rather than that's not appropriate for you. It's too easy to whatever. we can all sorts of things we say to children about what they're reading when they put it in front of us, and we're as guilty of that as parents. Even parents, like I'm aware of all of this and still make the same mistake with my own child.
I know when we met before, we did talk about us saying, right, well, you need to read that first, then you can go and do your gaming, or
Yeah,
then you can go and, go
that's
out and
it.
play with your friends. So yeah, how we talk about
That
it.
positioning, exactly, and then positioning of the whole habit in relation to the other things that they're enjoying, and gaming, great example. Any sort of phone screen use. Whilst we might know as adults that something like screen time isn't as healthy for our children as reading might be, if we position it to children like that, they might read it slightly differently. So they might interpret that as, oh, well, you know that reading is less fun than gaming. So you're giving me gaming as a reward for doing the thing that is more boring than that. So instead, how do we need to think about, and this is tricky, like I don't think there's a single solution to this. How do we position reading as a yes and rather than a and as a kind of one of a group of things that children might be doing in their spare time that we know is super important, but we don't give the children the impression that we're desperate for it because it leads them to kind of draw different types of conclusion about it. And that can be about us modeling some of those behaviors ourselves as adults. So we also spoke to the children, also identified that adults do a lot of telling children how good reading is, but don't necessarily show children that they think that's the case. So what might we be able to do in order to model that kind of our reading in front of children in a way that's meaningful too? So not a performance necessarily of us reading a Booker Prize winning novel in front of children, be like, look at me reading my very important book, but instead kind of that can be a conversation, it could be a talking about it, it could be talking about listening to audiobooks on your way into work, you don't have time to read otherwise. It could be sort of acknowledging to children that part of your bedtime routine is reading, if it is, or that actually, do you know what, I'm really tired today because I've done all of this really tough stuff, I really feel like just watching a TV show, or I might adjust my reading, so I'm going to read a magazine tonight rather than reading a book. So it might be all of those things, and I think kind of making those achievable, like it's so easy to sound like make an ideal picture out of reading. You talked a bit before about the kind of perfect picture of someone reading fiction. Our reading lives are much messier than that, and I think exposing children to that sense of a messy and sometimes sporadic reading life is quite important as well.
If I hone in on the importance of consistency, though, is there anything that you've learned or that you talk about in terms of the regularity of reading, the importance of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like all habits, if you have to do something regularly in order for it to stick. So that it is important that you have that regular exposure. That's where time sits within our 6 principles of reading. It is important to do that. I think it's important not to make that time thing feel like an impossible challenge for people. It needs to feel achievable, but it's got to be a kind of, you can't just do it once a year and then hope for the best type situation. It's a regular drip feeding of that habit, and it even if it can't be every day, like making that time across a week is important.
Yeah, I know I always liken it to like the couch to 5K, that you can't just get up and run a 5K straight away. Not many of us can anyway.
Yeah,
It is about actually training and doing
yeah,
something regularly and often. But yeah, I mean, really resonating on in terms of what kids are reading, that actually it's about celebrating all reading. Like you mentioned there, you might say, oh, I'm a bit tired today, so I'm not going to. But actually, sometimes kids have been reading all day, us as adults, but it's just not necessarily the format that some children see reading as this thing. So opening those conversations and talking about things they've been doing or things they've been reading is important, I think. One of the things just to focus in on is we have a What Kids Are Reading report every year, um, which is absolutely is like a treasure trove of lots of different information. I know I sent you it to have a look at last year's report. There's 1.2 million pupils in bits of data in there that shows you what they are reading. So a great tool and asset for children, for teachers and for children. But one of the things in there that came up was that year 7 students reading less than 15 minutes a day on average read about 84,000 words per year. And when we increased that time to 30 minutes or more, they read so many more words. It was 1.4 million words. So that's a huge difference in actually the exposure to language that we're giving children in terms of the time we dedicate to reading every day. And the EEF and the National Literacy Trust research shows that pupils that use things like Accelerated Reader, which is one of Renaissance's platforms, which really try to support that structured reading, like you have been talking about that drip feeding, but also honing in on, what children are enjoying reading, what they might like to try next. So it gives those personalized recommendations too. Makes a big difference, not only on confidence and fluency of that child, but also in them thinking more positively about their achievements and their goals and how they're securing those goals. And that in that report was especially true for disadvantaged pupils. So, can you tell us what you're exploring in your PhD? Because I know you mentioned that one of those key relationships for a young child is parents, and that's what your PhD is around. Um, so, what are you finding? What does World Book Day learn about how parent support is really crucial here?
Yeah, sure. So if we thought that doing it in school was complicated, looking at homes is even more complicated. You've got such a well, it's true of what we're seeing in our children as well, but in a less controlled environment potentially. So we're looking at factors around motivation and hope and expectation of parents in terms of what being a reader actually might look like. So is the end of your expectation and hope for your child that they're literate? Or is it that they're building a kind of reading for pleasure habit? And how is that manifesting itself in the home environment around kind of what parents are kind of that same tension around what parents are saying and what they're doing themselves is even more manifest at home because children are very aware of their home environments and what that looks like. I think what's really interesting is then how that kind of connects with what's expected from school and the extent to which parents just follow what school's asking them to do. That's either as a result of underconfidence or just kind of a sense and a deep trust in the professionals that are in front of the children that these are the things that are being modeled for them, and so this must be the right way to deliver this practice. So there's a huge range of things, and I think often we end up in a situation where parents and teachers are making a series of assumptions about each other that just have a lot more nuance in them than are kind of really there. So I guess what when I'm mostly uncovering and what we've mostly uncovered in terms of our conversations at World Book Day as well is that the picture is complicated, and also that it's very often not that a parent doesn't care. It might be that a parent hasn't been able to support their child to get to be the reader they want to be, doesn't feel like they're able to do that, doesn't feel like it's their job to do that. That does exist. That does seem to be available, but it's not as straightforward as making that easy assumption that they don't want to. And also, I think that there's a diverse, just as with our children, there's a diversity of parent groups out there. So we might not be able to put on a single intervention space that is going to meet the needs of all the parents that are in front of us. And asking some of those questions about what's going on at home, using pupil and parent voice in order to ascertain what the barriers are for your particular setting and the types of help that they're seeking to access can give a better steer in turn rather than just putting on something that might be pitched at a more generalist audience. So when we've spoken to practitioners about it in our recent set of conversations, the things that they've spoken about in terms of really kind of getting a sense of what that feels like at home is doing kind of low stakes engagement events where parents and their children are doing things together around books and readings. That might just be, it might be a breakfast type style with some books on the tables and some browsing time. For younger children, it might be having some picture books available and reading together, or it might be a read aloud session that's for parents and children, not as a explicit teaching tool, but as a experience to share. And then maybe supporting some of those conversations as more relaxed conversations that aren't focused on where your child's attainment is, but instead are about, oh, what do they like doing at home? And what are the things that they, do they play around any of these stories at home? Have they talked to you about the stuff that we're reading at school at home? So that you can kind of build that sort of bigger picture. And you can even see when you're seeing parents and children sort of interacting together, you can see the types of relationships they have around books and reading, and you can see maybe the types of support or the type, and indeed you might be surprised by what you're seeing, because you might have a set of expectations around families that they're sharing, the children showing something in school, but actually maybe something slightly different is going on at home. And that's always worth knowing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really making me think actually as you're talking through all of these bits of research that you've been doing, that context is really king, isn't it? It's about really spending time to know your children and also know their families. and what's going to engage them. Because that idea of low stakes but high engagement activities that allow a very kind of comfortable environment for families to feel like they can get involved rather than that they don't dare get involved is really, really key. I know we hear loads of stats, don't we, about how many books children should have at home, but actually, in some realities, that's just not the case. But things like digital libraries or libraries in communities are so key, just as those access points for some families. But they've got to feel like the door's always open and that they're actually welcomed into those spaces, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point. And I think like just being aware, everybody being aware of the huge range of things that are available to them in the community that exists outside school as well is super supportive. So our librarians are amazing. They can find books for everyone. And also the relationship with a librarian who in school, if you're lucky enough to have one, what a treasure trove they are. But also public librarians who have no stake in the game in terms of how well your child is reading, just want to give books out to children and have the access, that range of knowledge that you might not be able to access as a teacher because of all the other things that you're having to do. But of course, they're also the bridge between home and school. So, creating those relationships with your community spaces, booksellers, just this huge treasure trove of knowledge around what might be helpful for practitioners, but and also for children and their families. So making those relationships with those people who exist outside of school, who live and breathe all of these things, and then supporting that with access to it. So that might be through a range of things. It might be by buying a selection of books that you choose together for your school setting. It might be by providing them with digital access on a digital library. It might be with supported visits and leading into the summer reading challenge or a challenge around other events like World Book Day that do kind of catalyze and motivate people to kind of get involved with things outside. But it's kind of showing that it isn't just one institution's job as well, that it kind of there is this wide network of support that's available, and you can find those access points in the place where you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So I guess with schools, it's about tapping into what's going on in that local community and just making sure that they are telling parents all about that. Um, okay, great. Let's just round off then in terms of let's go back to World Book Day, because I know with World Book Day and the Year of Reading, there's lots going on. So do you want to tell us what's happening this World Book Day, particularly around getting books into the hands of children who need them the most?
Yeah, we are obviously really excited that it's National Year of Reading, and everything that we've been saying is being amplified even more by that year-round campaign this year. So that's fantastic. Also, we've been really lucky as a result of that campaign to be able to put books into schools for the first time this year, which is we absolutely know is what teachers have been crying out for. So I normally only have access to a small amount of books that we can put into community delivery. This year, we've got access to 400,000, which is incredible.
Wow.
And it's amazing. And we've particularly, so huge thanks to the National Year of Reading and also our other funders for that. But we identify areas, so quite specific about where these books are going, where children might not normally access the token exchange. So they tend to be in areas of high social deprivation, which means that they don't have access to a book retailer. We're really careful to make sure that we're not putting books into a space where they're not accessing that community provision. That community provision just isn't there. So we're giving books to schools the first time. They're telling us how they're going to run the hubs in their schools. We're so excited about the range of things that are going on. So it's providing some schools with 100% access to the books, but also giving those opportunities, those low stakes, high engagement pieces, because they're opening up the school to the wider community to have a kind of book selling, book exchange. Some of them are adding book swaps into it as well. So I can't wait to hear how that all goes at the end of World Book Day. And it's really exciting for us to see all of that going on in the wild, as it were. And then in terms of our normal provision, we've got our normal range of resources and activities and lessons and things that support those 6 principles that I talked about right at the beginning. So there's live lessons, there's resource downloads, hopefully there's ideas across our website, which has been redesigned this year and is much easier to use, I hope, and it should provide prompts for kind of ideas to support those 6 principles. So you might not want to cover all of those, but you might have identified that you're in your setting, like choice is a big deal, for example, or building that habit's a big deal. And you should be able to find some things that support a kind of intense moment around that on Robert Day that might then spread out across the rest of the school year. That's our hope anyway. And in terms of books, they went on, they're out in the wild now. So give those tokens out early is our big advice, so that children get the best selection.
Wow, it sounds really exciting. And just to clarify, it's worldbookday.com if anybody's thinking, where do we go? That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I should have probably said that. Thank you.
No, that's great. Right, if I may, I just want to indulge us because we're doing this Magic of 15 campaign, which is all about getting kids reading and getting kids reading for a minimum of 15 minutes because we know what the difference that can make. So I know from talking to you before that you read a lot in your day job and for pleasure. But if you had to protect reading time just for pleasure, just for yourself, I'd just like to know, how do you find your 15 minutes?
That is such a great question, because there's no guilt like being responsible for reading for pleasure and not doing it yourself.
No pressure.
No pressure. So I try and protect that around bedtime. So I always read to my child before bedtime, and that is a great moment. And so I try and keep that habit for myself as well. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I end up with a book on my face.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you know, fall asleep after tea?
Yeah. And now that my son's getting a bit older, I'm now also trying to make a habit of having a book in the lounge that I find easy to dip in and out of, or a newspaper supplement or something, so that my instinct when he's distracted isn't to pick up my phone, but instead to pick up a book so that he can see me reading and get used to it.
That's a great tip. That is a great tip.
Well, it is a great tip, except that my husband can get away with this technique fine. But the minute I pick up anything that looks like I might not be paying him full attention, it gets stolen. But I'm hoping that by kind of exposing him to it regularly, he'll get used to it. So I'll build his habit of ignoring me reading. That's my plan.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip, because often I am reading on my phone, but obviously to an outsider, they don't know that. So just having something physical to read, I love that one. I'll be using that one. Well, Kate, thank you so much. It's been great speaking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Georgina.
If you want to find out more about World Book Day and how to get involved, head to worldbookday.com. You'll find activities, author videos, and information about the £1 book token exchange. You can also find resources and quizzes for World Book Day at takethequiz.co.uk. To download our What Kids Are Reading 2025 report and read our research on the impact of reading for 15 minutes daily, visit uk.renaissance.com. Look out for our Magic of 15 Minutes campaign, because regular reading really does make a difference. And as Kate reminded us today, it's not just about the minutes logged, it's about creating the space, choice, and relationships that help children want to read. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us. And don't forget that you can catch up on all previous episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search for the Renaissance Space podcast. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from GL Assessment.